Hey everybody, welcome back. So I've got another video for you, and this is sort of another one in the What the Tech series that I've been sort of doing, where I sort of talk about different technologies that interest me. And one of the technologies that interests me right now is this guy, and it's not particularly new. It is a Nexus 4. I'm guessing you're looking at that like, what the heck? Although, I mean, this video has a title, so maybe not. So the reason why I think this is particularly interesting is I'm running Ubuntu Touch on this, and this is something that I've wanted to do for a really long time. I think I mentioned this in another video not too long ago. This is the reason why I switched to Android from iOS. I saw the Convergence demo a number of years ago online, and I was doing work for Canonical. And the idea just really seemed like a great concept where you could have a cell phone. That cell phone would run Linux. And basically what you would do is you'd plug in a USB to HDMI adapter and some Bluetooth mouse and keyboard, and you would have a fully functioning, albeit a little bit low powered desktop that you could walk around with in your pocket. And all you would need to do is just have a monitor available. And as somebody who goes into a lot of environments and lectures and teaches, that was a really interesting idea. So it's something that I've wanted for a really long time. But unfortunately, the project was, sort of canceled by Canonical. They stopped active development on it, and it kind of went away a little bit. So this video is a little bit of a review, but it's also sort of talking about Linux and the cell phone in 2019, because I think we're in a very interesting place right now, specifically in this year, 2019, because there's a number of different things happening. We're going to talk about librem phone a little bit. We're going to talk about Pine Phone. We're going to talk about UB Touch, which is the successor / continuation of the Ubuntu phone, which is what I have installed on this Nexus 4. We're going to talk about Plasma, which is the project from KDE. We're going to talk about a number of different things, and just generally the state of Linux on the cell phone. But I think probably most importantly, why you should give a darn, right? We'll say. And I think there's a really good reason for it. And I think that right now is actually a good time for this. So before we get into the different things that are available, let's talk about the why. So let me go switch over to my main display, and I'll sort of switch over to my diagramming application, and we'll go ahead and take a look at this. So basically where we're at right now, right, let's sort of talk about that and sort of the why Linux and open source and free software on the cell phone is a useful thing. So basically there are two players right now in the cell phone market, right? There's a couple of niche players, but basically there's two main players in the cell phone space. There's Apple and there's Google. Right, so those are the two companies in the space that we're talking about. And I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this. It's not going to be surprising to anybody. And on the Apple side of things, Apple has a very simple business model, right? Apple will sell you a phone, right, to you, and in exchange, you give them money. And because of that, and because of the company and its culture and a lot of the things that sort of go into it, Apple tends to be pretty good when it comes to privacy and user rights and things like that when it comes to software. They have a business model which is conducive to them protecting your digital privacy to them not necessarily tracking everything about you, using you as something to sell. You have some control over that. So I think from that perspective, Apple is pretty good. However, when it comes to the hardware, right, Apple is not very good, and they don't give you a lot of freedom. First off, their operating system only runs on devices that are made by Apple. So you cannot get another vendor and then install iOS on it. It's not a thing that you can do. I know I'm not telling you things that you don't know at this point. I'm just sort of setting the stage for stuff. So we're just making sure everybody's on the same page in terms of things. So additionally, their business model is to sell you hardware, right? So they're going to do things to lock you in to their ecosystem, right? So, right, they're going to go ahead and try to get you locked into their ecosystem with their software, right? So you're going to be using things like iMessage. You're going to be looking at the iOS cloud services. You're going to be looking at various different apps and software that you can only get through the iOS store, or that you would have to go rebuy if you move over to a different vendor. So there's a lot of different lock-in. Additionally, they make decisions in terms of hardware that you may not necessarily agree with, right? So I think the one that most people will point to is the idea of your headphone jack, right? So I think this is something that a lot of people have complained about, and I think we're all sort of familiar with. But headphone jacks, people like them. They've been around for a really long time. You can use any set of headphones with your device if it has a headphone jack. But Apple, has decided that they don't want to have headphone jacks. And a big reason for that is if you're going to buy some device that requires Bluetooth, well, you might as well buy the ones that Apple sells, because they're going to work better. They're going to be better integrated. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, right? I'm not saying that you shouldn't buy, Apple earbuds. I know a lot of people love them, and they're great. But the idea is that you don't necessarily have a huge amount of choice in the matter, right? You can get a dongle adapter kind of thing and stuff like that. But the idea is you're very limited in terms of your choice when it comes to hardware if you're in the Apple ecosystem. You take it that way, or you don't take it at all. Right? That's how it is. If we switch gears and we go to the other side of the equation, Apple has a business model where they sell you a phone, right? That's how they make their money. Google has a business model where they sell you, right, to advertisers. And the advertisers give Google money. And by definition, that means that they're not going to have your best interests at heart, right? Now, famously, their motto as a company is "Don't be evil." And I know that there's a lot of very good people that work at Google, and a lot of people have great intentions. But regardless of that, a lot of people are very uncomfortable with this idea where an advertising company has devices that are in your pocket that have microphones that track your location, that look at what you browse on the internet, and then sell that. I mean, let's assume the best case scenario. The best case scenario is that Google is incredibly good about separating who you are from your data, right? So they're very good about that. They don't sell anything about you specifically. They take all the best practices in terms of trying to go ahead, and when they expose this stuff to the advertisers, you are just identified by some kind of random number, and it's not tied to your first name and last name and social security number and all that kind of stuff, right? Let's assume that that's the case, the best case scenario. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Well, they're still collecting this stuff, and people get hacked. And Google, despite I'm sure being very, very, very good at security, eventually we'll have a massive data breach. That's how this thing works. It's sort of like entropy. You wait long enough, everything's going to run out of energy. Eventually, if everyone is attacking Google constantly because they're a very big target, at some point, someone's going to get through. So at that point, your data will, be in the public. And that's a scary proposition, right? So, I mean, if you look at some of the breaches that we've had for security in the last number of years, things like credit reporting agencies and things like that, those are small potatoes. That has nothing on the idea of Google having, their core data get exposed. And I think the safe assumption is at some point that's going to happen, right? So on the other side of things, though, the hardware, right, runs on lots of different vendors. Right? So if you like the way that LG makes phones, you can buy phones from LG. If you like the way that Huawei makes phones, you can buy your phone from Huawei, assuming that there's no like import restrictions on them and the craziness that's going on with the U.S. law. But Samsung, there's a bunch of different devices, right? So there is an open marketplace, right? And that open marketplace means competition. Now, most of the new phones from the big players don't have headphone jacks because they're copying the success of Apple. Most companies follow Apple's design decisions when it comes to hardware because they invest a lot of money in usability, and it's easier just to go copy somebody else as opposed to invest a lot of money. And you can, be fairly safe in the idea that this is going to appeal to, a large segment of the market. So they follow Apple. But there are vendors where you can go get a replaceable battery still. Shocking, I know. Some people like that. There are vendors where you can still get a phone with a headphone jack, right? There, in fact, are even still, I think, I haven't looked at this personally myself, but there are phones that you can get that still have a physical keyboard. They're very few and far between. They're not the popular devices, but it's a marketplace. So you will have these niche products, right? You can get a ruggedized Android phone. If you're somebody like me who has a boat and likes to go sailing and things like that, having a waterproof phone is nice. If you're somebody who goes camping, having a ruggedized phone where it's big and clunky but very protected, that can be nice. Apple's not going to sell you one of those, right? That's just not how they roll. That's not their core audience. So both of these companies, both of these ecosystems have some really good benefits. And additionally, both of them are very usable, right? I think that's a really big thing from a consumer standpoint. Like if we have a phone, we've gotten to a place where there's a certain level of quality that we expect. And both iOS and Android provide those. They have slightly different interfaces. They have slightly different, UI sort of decisions, but generally they both provide a very satisfactory experience, right? So I've been using the Ubuntu Touch device, which is ubtouch or ubports is the official product, for about a week now. Not as my primary phone. I've had this as sort of a secondary device. I'm still waiting on a new SIM card. I have Google Fi, ironically, and they give you 5 SIM cards, I think, that you can get for data SIM. So I just ordered another one, and I'm going to be using that in my my phone as a data phone, and we'll play around with that more. And I plan to have this for the next few weeks and months and kind of play around with it. But the idea that sort of drove this was the Librem phone, which I preloaded all these tabs and I forgot to load that one. So let me go ahead and pull up Librem. Librem 5 phone. So the Librem 5 phone is from Purism. Purism, if you are not aware, is a company that makes Linux and I suppose you could put BSD or other kind of things on there. But basically, it's a company that manufactures laptops and devices, and they have launched a Kickstarter for an open source phone. And the big differentiator between this phone and a lot of the other devices on the market is it's sourced in a way where all of the components are very friendly to running stock standard Linux. Now it's probably going to be on an ARM processor. I forget the exact processor that they're using, but you can recompile it, and it's something that is not going to require a huge amount of engineering effort from the open source community to get their software running, which is one of the big hurdles that the Ubuntu phone faced early on. They didn't really have a lot of dedicated hardware partners for it, so they had to sort of move their software, migrate their software, port their software to Android devices, and those Android devices required using some binary blobs that were unknown and sort of drivers from Android, and it was a messy kind of process. So this is a really interesting idea, and it's something that a lot of people are excited about, and I thought this seems kind of promising. Personally, however, I've been burned a lot of times in the past by being an early adopter. So I had a Pebble smartphone, and I've had 3D printers, and all this kind of stuff. And what I found is a lot of times it doesn't work out. Sometimes it does, but a lot of times it doesn't work out. So I figured this time, before I threw down $650 on a new cell phone, which I'm gonna do anyway, right? I need to go buy a new phone at some point anyway. But if I could go ahead and kind of pre-vet this to see if this was a viable solution, that'd be pretty interesting. And because this is going to be an open phone from a hardware standpoint and something that's very easy to port Linux to, they're going to have their own version of Pure OS, which is basically just a Debian-based version of their operating system. It's just Linux, and that will run on their phone, right? So that's the one that they're going to go provide. But you can also go ahead and run Ubuntu Touch on it, right? So they're working with the Ubuntu community, the ubports community, to go ahead and run this on your phone. So the current devices that are supported on Ubuntu Touch are, it's a small list, right? So we've got Nexus 5, OnePlus One, we get the Fairphone. I think there's 11 devices in total that this is supported on, and there's current ports in progress. But you can see a lot of these are older. I'm using the Nexus 4, and I probably should have got a Nexus 5 because I think it was $5 difference on eBay. I got this for $40 something. So that's one of the nice things about this is a very low barrier to entry to try this stuff out. So I grabbed this $40 something. I probably should have spent the extra $5 to get a Nexus 5 just because it's 4G as opposed to 3G. This is a 3G phone. I didn't realize that when I got it. But very, very low barrier to entry, right? So there's some interesting things about this though. So the first thing is there are phones you can run this on. There are inexpensive phones that you can go run this on. They're all a little bit older, but there are devices out there that you can go use for this. Because of the nature of the librem phone and the fact that they don't have to mess around with a huge amount of issues porting the Android bits, it's going to be very straightforward for them to go move this over to the librem phone. So one of the options that you will have is not necessarily to go run Pure OS, but to run Ubuntu on your phone, right? Additionally, there's another project called Plasma, right? So Plasma is from the KDE team. This is something that you may be familiar with from the KDE desktop. Plasma is the name of their kind of new desktop that came after KDE 4. And this is a pretty interesting idea. And one of the big things that's happened is because these guys are working on Plasma on phones, the Ubuntu folks and the Plasma mobile folks have sort of adopted a project called Halium. So Halium is basically using this libhybris kind of project to be sort of an Android translation layer. So the idea is you will have, sort of Android, binaries and drivers, stuff like that. And then you'll have the Halium, which is basically going to be sort of a universal interface for, interacting with the Android components, like the cellular modem and things like that. And then you're going to go ahead and have Linux running on top of it. And the interesting thing about this is this could be Ubuntu ports, or this could be Plasma, right? But they're both adopting this as a standard. So that means that there's probably going to be a lot more active development on it. It's going to make this a lot more doable. So that's pretty interesting. So that's a big change. So now we don't just have one open source project trying to go work on porting Linux to Android phones. We have multiple doing it, and doing it in a manner where you port your stuff to Halium, and then you basically port Halium onto an Android device, and that device will work for anything. So that's cool. And then we have a couple other things that are going on. So Pine, which is a company that has made these ARM-based development boards, similar to like a NanoPi. Basically, they're like a little Raspberry Pi, but kind of on steroids, right? So they've introduced some new products. So they've had for a number of years some fairly innovative products, one of which was the Pinebook. So basically a low-powered Pine, based, one of these little board-based laptops that you could go ahead and use. And they were very inexpensive, very straightforward. You're not going to be doing gaming on them, but if you want a cheap little laptop, you can see that these are going for $100, right? Really interesting idea. They announced that they're going to be coming out with a Pine phone, much like Librem phone. It's also going to be open source. So all open source components in terms of open hardware, very easy to go port, Linux to, things like that. And they're going to be working with the Plasma team, but again, open hardware. So that means that you could go ahead and run Pure OS on it, most likely. You can also go ahead and run ubtouch. So why am I talking about all this? So the thing that historically caused a lot of problems in being an early adopter of things is if a company decided that it was no longer something that made sense for them to support it. Microsoft, for example, had the Windows Phone for a while, and it was really interesting. I seriously considered getting one, but I was sort of in between phone cycles. So I had, an existing phone. It was working fine. I'm not just going to go buy a new phone specifically to go, use Windows on it. But I really liked the idea of having them as a player in the marketplace, right? From a business standpoint, they're sort of the company in between Apple and Google, where they would sell you the operating system effectively. Now, what they would do is they'd sell the operating system to the phone vendor, and the phone vendor would sell you the phone. So just like when you buy a laptop or a desktop in the store, you're paying some money to Microsoft. But their business model was one that sort of split the difference. So they weren't necessarily selling you as a product, but also you had support for a lot of hardware. So they were a really interesting provider. And honestly, I wish that they were still in the marketplace. But they decided that it wasn't in their best interest as a company that has a fiduciary obligation to their shareholders to keep pursuing it because they weren't making money. So that project died. And one of the wonderful things about open source is you don't have to worry about that as much, right? So Canonical decided that they no longer wanted to be in the business of, paying developers to write code to run on a phone. So a group of developers who were working on this said, okay, cool, that's fine. We're just going to go fork it. We'll call it ubports now. And we're just going to keep working on this. Right? So doesn't matter. Right. So it would be nice if Canonical was still spending a lot of money on this and being active in the development. But they don't have to. If they go away, the project keeps continuing. Other people will pick it up and continue on. So I think the really interesting thing right now is we have hardware coming out from multiple providers that can support this. We have, different projects all working in sort of parallel on very similar things. And because they're all Linux based, right, there's, a lot of communication and sort of overlap in the projects. And also a lot of the applications are going to be compatible, right? This is something that a lot of the folks working in those projects have talked about. So there's a last little bit that kind of goes into this. Now, I tried to go to the Firefox OS initial website, but the Mozilla sort of site, they don't really have anything about it anymore. But Firefox OS is another sort of important piece to this. So Firefox OS, as the name implies, is basically sort of like a Chrome OS that was targeted for phones. And the project basically is dead at this point. It was open source, I believe, because that's basically how the Mozilla Foundation does everything. So we could probably go ahead and grab the code for this. But that project is more or less dead. And basically what it was is it was a very simple phone that ran web-based applications, right? And back in the day when this project was running, about 6 or 7 years ago, I think is about the timeline, maybe 2007, 2008, something like that. That wasn't perfect. The web wasn't as stable. It wasn't as fast. Rich web-based applications weren't quite there. We didn't have things like WebRTC. That's changed quite a bit. But one of the really interesting things is those applications are still around, right? They're all web-based applications. So if you go back and you go to a site that was created as a web app for Firefox OS on a modern browser, it works great because we got HTML5, we've got JavaScript, we've got much faster phones now. So this is a pretty interesting thing. I don't have Facebook installed on my phone anymore. That's something that I've just chosen not to do. I don't like getting the notifications, but I will use the Facebook web application on my Android phone, and it looks great. And in fact, the same thing is true here. If I go ahead and use Firefox on my Ubuntu phone, their web app is phenomenal. It just, I think it's m.facebook.com. And it basically looks and feels just like your normal Facebook. Very, very smooth, very seamless, works great. It's a very viable option. So that's the thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to get the UB phone. I wanted to try it out. I wanted to go see how are the applications? Do they work? Does the phone crash all the time? Can I go do things like, get directions? What are the state of the applications of this? Because if the applications are good on the Ubuntu phone, they're probably going to be good on all the other stuff, right? And so I was kind of curious to see where are we at. So just to kind of make sure that folks are kind of aware of all the kind of stuff. I am running ubports. It is, I forget their naming conventions on the versions of things. I can just go look it up on my phone. But I think it's like revision 7 or something like that, spin 7 or something like that. Let me go look at the about kind of section of this system, about this device. Let that load for a second. So a couple things that when I'm showing you guys stuff, this is OTA 7, right? So this is version OTA 7. The release cycle is fairly quick, so I think the next version is out within a couple months is the target. Yeah, so let me go show you some of this stuff, right? So I've got some videos over here. And the first one is, I'm just going to go pull this up where this is going to be showing you the phone just booting. The fact that it's just neat, the idea that you can go ahead and see an Ubuntu loading screen with your nice purple and orange color scheme on the phone, and it loads up quickly. It's very smooth. It works nicely. This is a video, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the mute button on that because I had the window down. But this is me using my other phone in hotspot mode, so I could go ahead and pull down the live maps, and using this with driving directions. And I don't have a SIM card in there, so this is just using standard GPS as opposed to a GPS, which is assisted GPS using cell towers. But it worked. This is the UNAV program. It gave me good directions. It is about 80% as good, I would say, as Google Maps. So one of the things that I found is I intentionally, and I don't have this on the video, but a little bit later on, I intentionally deviated from the route, and it didn't catch that and sort of recalculate the route immediately. So I had to go ahead and touch the route and sort of have it recalculate again. But that was pretty darn good. Worked more or less flawlessly. The UI conventions for the Ubuntu phone are really, really good. They remind me a lot of WebOS. I had a Palm WebOS device. I really liked it. I just honestly, at that time, HTML5 based applications were not quite there. So I have gotten a couple small bugs, right? So this is probably the biggest one. I actually need to go file a bug report on this. This is me setting a half-an-hour timer on the clock application, and I start the timer, and it jumps forward a day, right? So that's obviously not good, right? But I think that's probably the kind of thing that would not be massively difficult to fix. Additionally, there was a couple other issues with Bluetooth when trying to pair. It showed just a ton of different devices that were all untitled. So I'm going to go file a bug report on that as well. But those are so far the two big issues that I've seen, and those aren't too bad. And I think that with more eyeballs on this stuff, with more people doing this stuff, I think this is very doable. I think that you could, at this point, use an Ubuntu phone, Ubuntu Touch, as a daily driver, right? I don't think it would work quite as nicely as an Android phone or an iOS phone, but I think it's about 80% of the way there. And then the other big thing, and I was talking to some of the developers about this on the Matrix channel that they have about another project called Anbox. And Anbox is running on some of their phones, and it's not running on all of them, but it's running on a number of them. And basically what this is the ability to go run Android applications on a GNU Linux operating system, right? And this, my friends, is a GNU Linux based operating system. So you can run Android apps. So this is probably a few months away in terms of when this is going to be available. But basically what they're doing is they're setting up a container that has Android running in it. And then you can go launch your Android apps. So I imagine that there's going to be a pretty big influx of support for this project in the next few months. And I think that would be really, really great, because there are some niche applications that you can't get as a web-based version. right? So I use Navionics, for example, as a phone-based chart plotter. It's sort of like a GPS for a boat, but you can do route tracking and stuff like that. And they don't have a web-based version. It's a subscription kind of thing and stuff like that. So if you could get that on Anbox, I think that'd be very, very interesting. Corporate applications, that could be, very useful for that. So I think for the vast majority of stuff, this will be completely unnecessary, but it works really well. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, and I can't speak to the other projects. I mean, obviously if you get a Librem phone, it's going to go come with Pure OS on it. If you get the Pine OS or the Pine phone when that comes out, it's going to go come with KDE Plasma on it. At least that's my understanding. But the UBTouch installer is really, really nice. I ran this on Windows. On Windows, it did not work, right? So the process looked great. It may just be that the Nexus 4 is a device that not very many people are using anymore, so it's not as well supported. But on Ubuntu, I set up my laptop with Ubuntu. I probably should have just done it in a VM, but I installed Ubuntu on there and ran the installer, and it took 5 minutes to get it set up and installed. Incredibly easy. So basically, I think that what I'm saying is that this is a very viable thing. I'm saying that this is a viable thing, and it is something that solves a legitimate issue, right? So at this point, we do not have real choice when it comes to our cell phones, right? This isn't even getting into the arguments about why free and open source software is useful, right? But on a device that you carry in your pocket that has sensors that capture tons of information about you, I think the idea of being able to go look at that code is useful. I'm not going to even get into that sort of thing. Most of the people who watch this channel will be familiar with open source anyway, right? I think for folks like journalists, executives, this whole idea of just sort of trusting and hoping that your phone is going to be secured is probably not the best idea for government agencies, things like that. They might have access to stuff, but I think it's a really interesting idea to be able to have real control over your device when it comes to something like a cell phone, and having a operating system that is in the public domain, because that's what open source is, that is close to or as good, because that's the thing with open source, man. Once it's rolling, once that ball gets started, people just keep adding little bits to it. So if you're somebody who has a couple extra bucks, if you're somebody who has, $50, $60, $100 of disposable income, what I would encourage you guys to do is go on eBay and pick up a Nexus 5. They're like $40, $50 maybe, right? If you really like it, maybe kick one of those open source projects, whichever one you like, whether it's ubports or whether it's the KDE Plasma folks or that kind of stuff, a couple bucks. Try it out. See if this is something that might be doable for you. If it is, awesome. If not, no worries. That you don't don't use if it doesn't work for you. But as a secondary device, this is fantastic. And I'll tell you, I've actually been really enjoying this without a SIM card. So what I'll do is they use a podcasting application called Podbird is one of the applications that you can get for this. It's really, really nice. As good or better as any other podcasting application that I've seen. And there's a bunch of different applications for this. Some of them are web-based, some of them are native applications, but they're all really, really good. And well, not all of them, but most of them are really, really good. And you get all the kind of standard stuff. You get, a Facebook client, you get a web browser, you get an email client, you've got a Matrix chat, which and Matrix is great because they tie into everything. You can go use them for Slack and IRC and things like that. So they got an Instagram client, but the Podbird application is really, really great. And what I've been doing is setting this up so it downloads my podcasts, and then when I go for a walk with take my dog out, I'll use this instead of bringing my regular phone. It's got a little light on there, so I can go ahead and not ruin my neighbor's shoes by missing some of my dog's leftovers, as it were, when I take her out at night. It's got a little voice recorder application, so if I wanted to take voice memos, a little notes application, stuff like that, but it doesn't have a connection to the internet. I can put music on this and listen to music. So it's a great little device that has all these great little features. And I'm got this SIM card coming, and I'm going to install it and use it and play with it. But I think there's a good chance I might also remove it. And I might just use this as a device that's a great little computer that doesn't have an internet connection, just so I can do that. So if you've got a couple extra bucks, great little possibility to go ahead and use. So think about picking it up. And if you're somebody who's considering buying the Librem phone, or if you get it on pre-order, I think that's a great thing to go do too, because you can kind of see what applications are available. Because, when the Librem phone comes out, I don't see any reason why they would not use UNAV, right? Or at least have it available. I mean, it's all open source. You can install it on anything. So, you'll know what applications you like and what the sort of alternatives are. Additionally, if you're somebody who pre-ordered that phone, you spent the $650 or whatever it is to buy one, and you've used some of the applications, you might then in turn go to the Librem guys and say, hey, I bought this phone. This particular application is the one that's a little bit wonky. Or if you're, like a lot of us, tech nerds, you know how to code a little bit. One of the things I'm going to go do is I'm going to go pull up the GitHub for the clock application, and I'm going to submit a bug. But if I have some time, I'm going to poke through it and see if I, maybe can just fix it myself. And then, it's open source, so I'll just push that back in, and then we'll kind of keep the ball rolling. So anyway, that's the state of Linux on the phone in 2019. Currently, there are a number of open source projects available. You get UB Phone, you get KDE Plasma, you get the Pop OS kind of stuff going on, right? So you get a few different things from the software side of things. We've got a number of phones that you can run it on right now that are available. You got 10, 11 different models. Most of them are a little bit older, so they're very cheap, very easy for you to kind of get on board with. And we've got a couple potential fully open, flagship style models coming out in the not too distant future. And I'd like to see this work, right? I'd like to see this work not just for some abstract reason that, is sort of a philosophical thing where it's like open source is nice. I like open source. I like free software. I'm also a pragmatist. Right? I want a phone that I can put in my pocket, and if I need to go text someone, the text will work. If I need to make a phone call, the phone call will work. If I need to go ahead and get directions somewhere, the Maps application will work. And I think we're there, right? I think we're there. There's probably going to be a couple tiny little things. What I would do is I would just consider this sort of a beta at this point, but like an RC2 kind of thing, right? You can run this. I think I heard the number that there's about 5,000 people running the Ubuntu phone, worldwide. I think those are fairly similar numbers to Firefox OS when that was out. It wasn't wildly popular, but there was a lot of people that were using it. So there's enough of an installed base, and there's enough people that have been using this where a lot of the low-hanging bugs have been fixed. A lot of the stuff that you would need to be there in order to be, consider this a usable device, a useful device, are there. So look at it. Think about it. You get an extra $50, maybe pick it up. So that's the state of the phone in 2019 for Linux on the smartphone. I hope you found this was useful. Also, I want to give a quick little shout out to another YouTube channel. There's a great little FreeBSD channel run by a gentleman named RoboNuggy. Well, I'm assuming that's a pseudonym, but he recently just hit 1,000 subscribers. So I wanted to say congratulations to him. If you're not somebody who is watching his channel already and you're interested in FreeBSD kind of stuff, go check his videos out. I find them to be very, very, very relaxing to listen to because he's got this very chill, northern British accent, and you can tell it about FreeBSD, and you can also just sort of feel the stress that kind of roll off of you because he's got that very chill, relaxing kind of voice. I think once you hit 1,000 people, you get to monetize. So now if you subscribe to him and you watch his video, you might actually, be buying him a coffee or something like that. So congratulations to you, Robonagi. You make great videos. I look forward to seeing more in the future. I probably should have put this at the beginning of the video because this has been a long one. And I feel there's a really good chance that most of you guys have fallen off at this point. But if you're still with me, if you're still watching the video at this point and you haven't subscribed, you should do that because you're obviously a nerd and you're obviously one of us. One of us. And I'm going to be talking about more of these kind of things in the future about Linux. And I'm sure as this kind of stuff evolves, we'll see more videos on that front. So thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. If you're going to be at the Southern California Linux Expo in 2019, look for me. I will be at the Vertical Sysadmin booth. I will have my Ubuntu phone on me. And if you want to check it out, I'm more than happy to kind of show it to you and let you take a peek. So have a great day. Catch you in the next one.